Will come to order. Thank you all for being here. We have an important subject to discuss this afternoon. Senator Vitter, thanks. Thanks for being here. I'm going to make some opening comments. Senator Vitter will as well. And then we'll hear from the first panel, which is General Bolden, and then we will invite up our second panel. We have had quite a discussion about the future of our nation's space program. And it all started with the new administration impaneling a very prestigious blue ribbon panel, the Augustine Commission, headed by a former space expert, a space expert who is a former CEO, Norm Augustine. And after that, it was such a comprehensive report. Many of us urged the White House, as they started to develop their budget, to fund NASA at the level that the Augustine Commission said, if you wanted to have a robust space program other than the existing budget, that you would have to have a fairly significant increase in the funding. Well, the White House decided a significant increase in funding that they would recommend to the Congress, $6 billion over 5 years, and that in this budgetary environment is no small matter. But it was only half of what the Augustine Commission was recommending. And over, as I shared with the White House staff and with the President as well, that there's only one person that can lead the space program, and that is the President, and that the President, who I know personally to be a space fan, a space aficionado, would have to make that declaration of support. And what happened was that instead of a declaration of support, the NASA budget, which has a lot of very forward-thinking and cutting-edge stuff in this budget, it was rolled out just as part of the regular budgetary message, and in the process, it ended up, in some cases, being misinterpreted, in other cases, giving a false impression. In other cases, good parts of the President's budget having been completely overlooked. Now, there's a lot that's good in this budget from this senator's perspective. We're seeing increases in aeronautics and science and Earth observation. The extension of the International Space Station, at least to the year 2020, was an obvious one, but heretofore, NASA budget said that the funding for the ISS was going to cut off in 2015. And there is in this budget an emphasis on encouraging science and technology, engineering, and math, and that is especially important. But here's the problem. Because the President did not make the declaration himself, and with the declaration that the Constellation program was going to be terminated, And with the angst that is already out there among the NASA family because of the layoffs that are anticipated because of budgetary decisions that were made 6 and 7 years ago, so that a new rocket was not ready by the time that the space shuttle was going to shut down, and therefore there were going to be layoffs. You add the angst to a statement that the Constellation program is going to be killed, and add to that that it was rolled out in a budget message without the president declaring it, and what did it give? It gave the perception that the president was killing the manned space program. Now, the problem is that we live in the world of perception. And if the substance is different from the perception, then we've got to straighten it out. And where the perception is substance, if we disagree with the substance, then we have to change it. And so I remind you that the president proposes and the Congress disposes. And so what we're going to start in the process of understanding the NASA budget that is presented by the administration, and in the process, we hope, and this is just a first step, to clear up the perception so that the clear declaration of the president's vision for space is there and that the American people understands it. And the president, either himself or through his administration, through his administrator, needs to clearly state what the goal is. Now, it's pretty obvious that the goal that we all have talked about for some period of time since we went to the moon over 40 years ago, the goal is to go to Mars. The question is, how do we do that? How do we develop the architecture, the technology, the way stations, the benchmarks? How do we do that? And so we should develop the technology in pursuit of that goal, not the other way around, that you develop technology and then you set a goal. As the saying goes, no wind is a good wind unless you know where the harbor is. Or, as that great American philosopher stated, Yogi Berra, you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. The hope is that we could provide more efficient access to low Earth orbit while freeing NASA to explore the heavens, the moon, the asteroids, Mars. But this budget doesn't hold up the second half of that bargain, because by eliminating the plans for a heavy lift vehicle and a spacecraft capable of excursions below low Earth orbit, the U.S., this senator fears, is going to be on the sidelines while other countries continue to make incremental progress toward destinations like the moon. So, what I am hopeful for is that from the President, the White House, or someone, that we are going to get a bold statement of vision and a declaration of the ultimate destination of our space program, and that is Mars. And that vision should support manned space flight beyond low Earth orbit, and that destination should be on the horizon. And then we can develop the technology for getting to that destination. And once the President has made his vision abundantly clear, it should then be left to the NASA administrator, working with the Congress, to make a detailed and the technical decisions and the funding that we would assist NASA by appropriating and authorize in order to achieve that vision. And it's in that spirit that this senator thinks that we need the continued testing of a booster as a technology test bed, a robust heavy lift vehicle program, and the continued development of the spacecraft for the missions beyond low Earth orbit. And we should accomplish these things in concert with some of the other more positive items that are in this proposed administration's budget. Technology research and development is well supported in this budget by advancing the technologies such as the on-orbit refueling, the aero capture techniques, the energy from space, in-space propulsion. It'll enable more efficient, safer, and faster missions throughout the solar system. But the effort should focus on technologies which make simply getting off the pad easier. And one of the concerns I have, Mr. Administrator, that I will ask you about is as you break down your budget, you've got about $7.8 billion over the 5 years for developing technologies, and you've got 3.1, less than half that amount, $3.1 billion over 5 years for the development of heavy lift. And in your remarks, I would appreciate it if you would explain that, because we ought to be doing both at the same time, and we have to get lift to get up and do these technology developments like on-orbit refueling. If you recall the giant Saturn V rocket that carried the folks to the moon, it was powered by those massive F1 engines capable of producing over 1.5 million pounds of thrust. Well, we've not had an engine of its capability in nearly 4 decades. And it's time that we initiate a program to develop a new modern liquid hydrocarbon engine that can power future launch vehicles. And we're going to have testimony from someone who knows something about propulsion technology, Captain Gibson, in a few minutes. This effort will serve to mature technologies which will benefit not only our civil space program, but our national security space enterprise and the commercial sector as well. Now, on the commercial sector, I clearly support the vision of eventually passing to them the responsibility of going to and from LEO. But until that time, there are a bunch of us that have 3 concerns. First, we need to ensure that we're not putting all of the eggs in one basket, and we can avoid this by ensuring that we have multiple competitors from both established and entrepreneurial companies competing with not only new innovative designs, but with proven vehicles as well. And so that competition will ensure that as it moves forward, some of the inevitable problems arise, that we will have some solid winners. And my second concern is that the shift to commercial spaceflight cannot come at the expense of astronaut safety. I bring to this committee today the shared concerns of Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby, our 2 counterparts on the Appropriations Subcommittee, particularly with regard to safety. And the 3 of us have talked about this. And so as these companies compete, they should expect to be held to the standards equal to those of existing government programs for human safety. And I also urge NASA to do its part by providing the commercial sector with the human rating standards to which the commercial sector must adhere, and to give them those standards as soon as possible. And thirdly, we simply must do right by the men and women who have made this space program great. We're entering a period of transition. There's a great deal of angst out there. We're at risk of losing skills and the corporate knowledge of those workers, and that knowledge having been acquired over 5 decades. And if the entrepreneurial endeavors are to receive billions of dollars in the years ahead, I encourage them to remember the responsibility that comes with that funding when they're making workforce decisions. And so, Mr. Commercial Operators, I'm putting you on notice that as you start to ramp up, you've got to look at this incredible, talented workforce that may be out of a job. This is a time of great change and challenge for our existing workforce, and the commercial sector ought to be aware of this. Now, it is clear that this budget carries forward the decision to retire the shuttle fleet by the end of this year, a decision that was made in the previous administration. A significant upheaval in this workforce related to the shuttle retirement is going to occur. But the massive loss of jobs is now exacerbated by the perception of the cancellation of Constellation and all the programs under it. And so by continuing with certain R&D elements, such as testing of a test vehicle, of R&D for heavy lift, and the development of vehicles for deep space travel, we can put the workforce to greater use during this time of transition. And so today's hearing is going to allow us to start a critical examination of this budget request and to formulating an appropriate congressional response. Again, I can tell you that I have never seen the appropriators and the authorizers unified as we are. And with that, let me stop and let me turn to my ranking member, Senator Vitter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all our witnesses, starting with Administrator Bolden. I'm just sorry, quite frankly, in terms of this hearing, that we're not going to hear from who I suspect are the true lead architects of this very radical budget proposal, including the Deputy Administrator, Garver. And I'd ask, Mr. Chairman, that we continue this discussion and specifically hear from her and/or others who claim true original authorship of this, so we can question them directly. And let me say, as a side note, there's been wide speculation that at some point in this administration, the Deputy Administrator would be up for Administrator's leadership position. And I can tell you, based on this budget, I will be a strong and fierce and active opponent of that, should that be proposed. You can tell I'm a little bit concerned about this budget, so let me explain why by focusing on 5 points. First, I absolutely believe that this budget and the vision it represents would end our human spaceflight program as we know it and would surrender, at least for our lifetime, perhaps forever, our world leadership in the area. And in so doing, I believe we would lose all of the enormous benefits of the technological advances that go along with all of that. Secondly, I believe it does this because it cancels all major existing human spaceflight programs, not only ending shuttle, but completely canceling its replacement, the Constellation program, and replaces all that with little more than a hope and a prayer that commercial providers will eventually pick up the slack. I don't think there's any realistic hope that that can be done on a reasonable timeline. I'd also point out that this radical vision, this radical departure from all previous NASA plans under any administration bears no relation to anything laid out clearly in the Augustine Commission report. So I'm not really sure why we went through that whole exercise. Third, I believe this budget, as the chairman very correctly noted, is a budget without a mission. You know, our greatest accomplishments in human spaceflight were gained because President Kennedy said, "We will land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of this decade." President Kennedy didn't say, we're going to spend several $billion and do some really neat R&D. He said, we're going to land a man on the moon, we're going to return him safely to Earth within this decade. It's a big difference. And the mission this budget lays out is more like my second statement, which is no mission at all. You don't accomplish great things without a clearly defined mission, and this budget has no clearly defined mission. Fourth, what does this do to the gap, the employment gap that we've all said we're very concerned about, including you, Mr. Administrator? I'll tell you what it does to it. In terms of employment within the entire industry, in my opinion, it absolutely expands the gap. I don't believe there's any possibility that we will be able to ramp up, depending on the commercial sector alone, in less time than our previous Constellation plans laid out. So it increases that gap. I can't tell you how many years, but it increases it. In terms of the gap regarding the NASA family, the folks within NASA programs like Constellation, it grows the gap. It grows the gap to infinity. It says there's no gap anymore. We just fall off a cliff. And I think that is enormously detrimental to the NASA family and the long-term capability of NASA. And fifth, I want to focus on that wonderful workforce. Those folks have been very, very patient, waiting for the signal from this administration, particularly concerning the next generation and the gap. Well, I'm afraid they just got it. And the message they have heard, not because of perception, but because of reality, the message they have heard loud and clear is what I just said. Their gap didn't just expand, their gap just expanded to infinity if this budget were passed. And all I say to that is I certainly want to offer a completely different message. I will fight with every ounce of energy I have to defeat this budget or anything like it, to fundamentally change it. And I want to give the NASA family out there some hope of doing that. And I believe there is great bipartisan support for that effort, as Senator Nelson laid out, including folks on this committee and including folks on the Appropriations Subcommittee. So those are my comments. I look forward to our discussion.
Well, we're going to have a chance, Senator Vitter, to perfect this budget. And that's what this process is all about. General Bolden, you may have bit off a little more than you wanted to chew with these opening comments. Let me just say that most everybody in this room knows Charlie Bolden and knows the extraordinary kind of leader that he is, retired Marine Major General. I've had him describe to me during his, and I shared this during the confirmation hearing, that General Bolden, another astronaut, had said to me that Charlie Bolden was the best leader that he had ever run into, and had taught him more about leadership than any other person, and that included that astronaut's experience in the astronaut office and in his 20 years as an Air Force officer. General Bolden is a veteran of 4 space flights. He is a graduate of the Naval Academy. He has had assignments in the Marine Corps up until the time that he retired that have been extraordinary assignments, and you come well prepared to a very tough job during a very challenging time and overlaid with a very difficult budgetary environment. General Bolden, welcome to the committee. It's an honor to have you here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And members of the committee, subcommittee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's fiscal year 2011 budget request for NASA. I'm grateful for the support and guidance this subcommittee and I look forward to working with you on enactment of the President's bold new direction for our agency. Before I continue with my statement, let me add one thing, though, that is not in my prepared statement. And I do, because my deputy was, I feel, unfairly represented, I hope that we have an opportunity to go back to that discussion. And I also would like to go back to the discussion on the NASA family, because I'm a member of the NASA family, and I have been since 1980. So I too share the passion that you expressed, Senator Vitter, about the NASA family and their welfare. I want to say right up front that I understand the committee's concerns that details such as our justification documents have been slow to reach you. I apologize and ask your continued patience as we finalize the details of this historic change in NASA's direction. Since the introduction of the budget, many have asked what the destination is for human spaceflight beyond low Earth orbit under the President's plan. The answer, as Senator Nelson has expressed, is that our program seeks to enable the capabilities we will need for astronauts to meaningfully explore the Moon, asteroids, and eventually Mars. And Mars is what I believe to be the ultimate destination for human exploration in our solar system, at least under my administration. The right investments in technology will allow us to map out a realistic path to this destination that continues to inspire generations of school children, just as it inspired me many years ago when I was growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, watching Buck Rogers go to Mars with ease each week from my seat in the balcony of the Carolina Theater there in Columbia. The President's fiscal year 2011 budget request for NASA is $19.19 billion, including an increase of $276 million over the enacted 2010 level. Longer term, I am pleased that the budget commits an increased investment of $6 billion in NASA science, aeronautics, and enabling technologies over the next 5 years compared with last year's plan. All of us at NASA appreciate the President making NASA such a high priority at a time when budget realities dictate reductions and freezes for other worthwhile programs. At a time when we all worry about the economy, NASA's bold new direction will assist economic growth in the United States, particularly in the aerospace industry. One lesson from decades of technology investment by the federal government is that funding for research and development leads to innovative capabilities and breakthroughs, which in turn lead to sustained private sector job creation. Such R&D investments are a cornerstone of the public-private partnership between our government and American industry. With the President's new vision, the NASA budget will invest much more heavily on technology, research, and development than recent NASA budgets. This will foster new technological approaches, standards, and capabilities that are critical to enable next-generation spaceflight, Earth sensing, and aeronautics capabilities. These investments will produce additional opportunities for U.S. industry to spur new businesses, such as recently announced partnership between NASA and General Motors to build an advanced dexterous humanoid robot, commonly called R2. I want to share a few highlights about NASA's bold new path to become an engine of innovation with an ambitious new space program that includes and inspires people around the world. Under this program, the United States will pursue a more sustainable and affordable approach to human space exploration through the development of transformative technologies and systems. We will encourage the development of commercial human spaceflight vehicles to access low Earth orbit. We will develop new technologies that will enable more efficient U.S. human exploration into the solar system than is currently conceived. As the Constellation program is ended in an orderly manner, I want to thank all of the NASA employees and contractors who have worked so hard on this program and given so much of their time and their heart. Their commitment has brought great value to the agency and to our nation, and they will continue to play a pivotal role in NASA's future path. Many of the things NASA has learned from the Constellation program will be critical as the agency moves forward. More specifically, in fiscal year 2011, NASA will undertake a flagship technology development and demonstration program with our international partners, commercial and other government entities to demonstrate critical technologies such as in-orbit propellant transfer and storage, inflatable modules, automated autonomous rendezvous and docking, and closed-loop life support systems. Heavy lift research and development that will investigate a broad scope of research and development activities to support new space launch propulsion technologies. Robotic precursor missions to multiple destinations in the solar system in support of future human exploration, including missions to the Moon, Mars and its moons, Lagrange points, and nearby asteroids. Significant investments for the development of commercial crew and further cargo capabilities. Extension of the lifetime of the International Space Station to 2020 or beyond in concert with our international partners. Pursuit of cross-cutting space technology capabilities led by the newly established Office of the Chief Technologist to spawn game-changing innovations to make space travel more affordable and more sustainable. Climate change research and observations, which will enable NASA to substantially accelerate and expand its Earth science capabilities, including a replacement for the Orbiting Carbon Observatory. Aeronautics R&D, including critical areas of Next Generation Air Transportation System, or NextGen, green aviation, and safe integration of unmanned aircraft systems into the national airspace system. Education initiatives, including the recently announced Summer of Innovation pilot program to inspire middle school students. Americans and people worldwide have turned to NASA for inspiration throughout our history. Our work gives people an opportunity to imagine what is barely possible, and we at NASA get to turn those dreams into real achievements for all humankind through missions we execute. This budget gives NASA a roadmap to even more historic achievements as it spurs innovation, employs Americans in exciting jobs, and engages people around the world. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for your support and that of this subcommittee. I would be pleased to respond to any questions you or the members may have.
And we will enter into the record the opening statement of the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Hutchinson. General Bolden, you've just made some news because you have stated that the destination is Mars. That's the goal. Do you have, in what you have just stated, do you have the approval of your superiors?
Sir, the words I used have been through every wicket I can think of, I assume that means I have approval to say that.
All the way up through the wickets of the White House as well?
All the way up through the wickets of the White House as well. And I would comment, Senator, that when we went to the moon, we didn't know what we were doing, but the moon's a couple of days away, and so we felt confident that that would not be a problem. When we take on Mars, it's radically different, and it offers radically different challenges. So I cannot give you, unfortunately, whereas President Kennedy said he wanted us to go to the moon and safely return humans in this decade, I wish that I could ask President Obama to do that. He could issue that challenge, but I can't tell him we can do that. Because at this particular time, I can't provide a date certain for the first human mission to Mars because there are too many capabilities that we don't have in our kit bag. And so I'm hopeful that through the technology demonstrations and technology development that we will undertake with Mars as the focus of our design reference mission, that we'll be able to get there hopefully quicker than we would have before.
Well, how will NASA determine the research priorities for a destination of Mars?
Senator, over probably the last 20 years, and I refrain from bringing in a stack of studies that I'm certain you and your subcommittee members are very familiar with that have come out over at least the last 20 years. If you look at those studies and the technologies and capabilities that have been listed in all of them, they've been pretty consistent. And they have all been focused on getting humans to Mars. So the big difference that we have today is that the President has decided that he wants to fund the research and development that's necessary to bring about those technologies and to give us those capabilities. So I am confident that the budget that I've been given will allow us to do that. You commented about the difference between technology and heavy lift, the fact that there was more in technology than there was in heavy lift. I can use any vehicle to get things to orbit, to low Earth orbit, to develop the kinds of technologies that we need. I don't need a heavy lift launch vehicle, nor would I want to use a heavy lift launch vehicle to put a propellant storage demonstration in orbit. That would be a waste of the taxpayers' money. I can use a Falcon, I can use a Taurus, I can use a Delta, an Atlas. I can use anything that can successfully get me to low Earth orbit to get the technology demonstrators that I want to get there. So that's why I think it's important to have more that we spend on technology development today than we do on the actual heavy lift itself. There will come a time that I will ask for more money on heavy lift.
Well, I found some additional money that you can use, General Bolden. We've spent $9 billion on Constellation thus far, and in this budget is another $2.5 billion to shut it down. If the Constellation program is canceled, how do we make sure that those valuable assets are integrated into the new program? And if the Constellation program is not shut down, how can we use that $2.5 billion that otherwise would have shut it down?
Senator, no matter what happens to the Constellation program, what cannot be forgotten is the work of the dedicated men and women who made that program possible. And already, although I have asked that we take a really hard look inside, deep into the Constellation program to determine what technologies and capabilities may be there that we want to retain, I can give you examples of things that have already come out of the Constellation program that are going to transfer directly to commercial space. We had a thermal protection system study that was done under the Constellation Technology Development Program. The SpaceX Corporation that is going to fly the Falcon 9 saw that technology and has adopted it, and so they will actually use the thermal protection system or a hybrid of it on their vehicle. That came out of the Constellation program. When I had an opportunity to tour Launch Complex 40 and talk to the people who actually work on Falcon 9 from SpaceX, I discovered that they intend to use a pusher type of launch abort system. I asked them if they had any information or had an opportunity to discuss MLAS, the MAX launch abort system that our folks at NASA had developed and tested, successfully tested out of Langley at the Wallops Flight Center. They told me they did not know about it. So I encouraged them to go talk to the people at Langley, because that is a technology, that is a capability that was developed out of the Constellation program that might be directly applicable to them. So it was $9 billion, if that's the right figure, that has been very well invested, and it has already brought great returns to the American public as well as to industry.
And part of those returns, as you ultimately want to develop a heavy lift vehicle, are the testing that's ongoing on existing rocket. We don't have to call it what its name is. Let's call it Rocket X. So what's the value of testing of a Rocket X in the R&D development of a heavy lift vehicle?
Senator, anytime you can, there are some people who say you can never test enough. I happen to be one of those, but I am also quite aware of fiscal constraints to testing. In my past life as a tester, you know, when I looked at Hoot Gibson, who's sitting behind me, will tell, we both, during our time as test pilots, you know, you look at your test plan and you always wanted to add one more flight so that you could say with a great degree of certainty that it was okay for a normal pilot to go fly what you just finished testing. There's not enough money to do that. So we need to look at prudent ways to test as much as we can, but not too much. And so any testing that I would be allowed to do in development of a new heavy lift launch system would be fantastic, within fiscal constraints.
Senator Vitter.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, you took exception to my statement about the deputy administrator. You said you wanted to explore that, so let's explore that.
Yes, sir.
By the way, I agree completely with the chairman's very strong positive comments about you, and it's for that reason that I don't think you were the original or prime architect of this budget at all. So let's explore the question, who within NASA or the administration was the original prime architect of this radical new budget?
Sir, without going into pre-decisional discussions or pre-decisional information, I can tell you that I participated in the construction of the budget. That's part of my responsibility as the NASA administrator. So I have to take, you know, if you want to look at somebody to blame, if that's what you want to call it, as the NASA administrator, I represent the inputs that we made to the budget. But
Mr. Administrator, you're confirming everything I just said. Let me ask the question again. Who is the prime original author of this radical budget vision?
you know, Senator, I was a contributor to this radical budget, as you
Mr. Administrator, you took umbrage.
Oh,
from
sir,
what
my
I said
comment, and
about
if-
my
yes, sir.
comment about Deputy Administrator Garver.
Yes, sir.
Are you prepared to completely refute what I think is the fact there?
And I'm not refuting anything, Senator. I just wanted to say that I think
didn't think you were.
I think Mrs. Garver was misrepresented in leaving the impression that she is an enemy of human spaceflight or she is an enemy of NASA or anything of that nature. I have found her to be a very competent, capable deputy. We come from different backgrounds. I think when I met with you earlier, I described two radical groups. One group being those who are radically in favor of Constellation, those who are radically in favor of commercial spaceflight. And if you ask anybody out of either of those two groups, they will tell you, don't listen to those guys over there because they're stupid. You can't go that way. I'm trying to get somewhere in the middle. And, you know, we both come from different backgrounds, and I appreciate that. I tell people in my meetings every day, I don't ever want to walk away from a meeting when I have a unanimous opinion about a decision we've made, because it means either everybody's been intimidated by something I said or they've given up that they can reason with me and they've sided with me for some unknown reason. I always want there to be difference of opinion among my leaders, because it means that we're at least keeping an open mind and we're looking for the optimal solution for the nation. And Lori is tremendous in providing me insights that I don't have about commercial space.
Okay, so just to be clear, are you refuting or not my conclusion that she was a prime leading architect of this?
Senator, I can't refute that because I don't, you know, there's OMB, OSTP,
Okay.
the Executive Office of the President, we all contributed to the budget.
Mr. Administrator, you highlighted a top goal of this budget to inspire school children.
Yes, sir.
Talked about middle school kids. And I'm looking for that inspiring nugget. I haven't found it yet.
Senator, I can give you
I mean,
the
what is
inspiring...
the quote? Quote,
Yes, sir.
quote, Mars is the focus of our design reference mission, close quote. I can tell you, I have two 7th graders at home. That's not going to inspire.
Senator, I don't want...
What is the quote?
Senator, I don't want a 7th grader to think about Mars. I want a 7th grader to get excited when in his or her classroom, they have an opportunity to to talk personally with astronauts on the International Space Station, as we frequently have them do almost every month. When the President communicated with Expedition 22 increment astronauts and the STS-130 crew last week, and was surrounded by school students who had an opportunity to communicate with them, they were inspired. I can trust me, I could look at their eyes. The president is inspired when he has an opportunity to do that. We are going to inspire children by having an opportunity for them to interface and interact with astronauts on the International Space Station now, thanks to this budget, until 2020. We would not have been able to do that before. And it doesn't make any difference how an astronaut gets to orbit. There are two things. There's access and there's exploration. I need a heavy lift launch vehicle so I can go do exploration. I don't, I want redundant, reliable access to space. I don't think there's any difference of opinion in this room in that regard. Whether I get to space on an Ares or an Atlas or a Delta or a Falcon or a Taurus, that's immaterial. What is important is that we have an American-made capability to get astronauts to low Earth orbit so that they can do developmental work on the International Space Station that one of these days is going to make it possible for us to go to Mars, because we'll understand a little bit more about bone loss, we'll understand a little bit more about muscle mass loss, we'll understand a little bit more about what disturbs the neurovestibular system. That's what I need. And it doesn't matter, no one will know how an astronaut got to the International Space Station 10 years from now. They won't know what vehicle they went on, nor will they care.
Well, Mr. Administrator, I think we just have a disagreement here. You said you don't want 7th graders to think about Mars. I absolutely want 7th graders to think about Mars, because that is the sort of thing that will inspire them. And the shuttle, the International Space Station, those are great things, and those people and those astronauts are heroes. Don't get me wrong.
Yes, sir.
But to my 7th graders, that is, to use their language, so last week. That is not going to inspire them. That is not going to inspire them.
Senator, with all due respect, I think you underestimate your kids. When I talk to school kids and they tell me they want to be an astronaut, what do I need to do to be an astronaut? I tell them, the first thing I say is forget it. And then they look at me real strange. I said, forget it. Because unless you study and work and get a technical background, a technical undergraduate degree, you have no hope of becoming an astronaut. So I want you to go in school, I want you to be in class, I want you to study really hard, I want you to do the absolute best you can do, and I want you to go to college, and I want you to get an undergraduate technical degree, and if you want to be a pilot and you want to be like me and that's all you can do, then go to the military. If you want to be a scientist or an engineer or somebody who's going to do the hard stuff in space, get a PhD or a master's, and then think about being an astronaut. So I think your kids understand that, and as long as I can keep them interested in staying in school and learning a lot of science and math, they're going to go to Mars. They're going to enable us to go to Mars.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm afraid they're going to look at the messages of this budget, and if they want to be an astronaut, they're going to conclude, forget it.
Sir.
That's my concern.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Administrator, what relation does this very dramatic change of vision have with anything laid out in the Augustine Commission? I mean, point us to a page of the Augustine Commission report that really suggests anything like this.
Senator, with all due respect, I don't really think that this is a radical departure from, it's not a radical departure from the vision for space exploration, if I can say, and it's not a radical departure from any other visions or dreams that people have had about going to space. What is different is it funds what is necessary to realize that vision. Somebody once told me a vision without resources is a hallucination. If you look at where we were prior to the 2011 budget, we were living a hallucination. We had a great, I won't use the term great, we had a vision for getting back to the moon, getting to Mars and other places in our solar system, but we did not have the funding to do it. We didn't have the assets to do it. We now have the assets to make an orderly progression to getting humans to a place like Mars, and I'm confident that we can do that.
Again, I just disagree. I believe the consensus opinion reaction to this budget is that it is a radical departure. And if vision without resources is a hallucination, resources without vision is a waste of time and money. And that's what I think this budget represents. Mr. Administrator, final question. You said you're a member of the NASA family, and you are, and I absolutely know that you want all the best for those folks and feel for them and are supportive of them. But this budget, canceling every major internal human spaceflight program in sight, most obviously Constellation, extends their gap, as I said, to infinity. So what do you tell those people in the NASA family?
Senator, as I've told them in the last 2 weeks or so since the budget came out, I tell them I don't know how they feel. My kids are 38 and 33, and they're out of school. So I don't know what a young engineer with a 15-year-old kid feels like right now. I know they're hurting. And if they happen to be a civil servant, I can tell them that they're going to be okay because they're going to have a job. But then, as a young lady told me at Johnson Space Center, I don't want a job. I want to be able to come to work every day and feel that I'm making a difference. And so I can tell them, as I have, that I'm going to do everything in my power to try to make sure that we develop some programs that are going to help us get to where we all want to go as soon as possible. I don't think we would have ever gotten there with the Constellation program set up and funded the way it was. I don't think anyone said Constellation was a bad program. I haven't read that anywhere. But I think that we can develop capabilities that will potentially allow us to get back to the moon, and because we are going to go back to the moon, and will enable us to get to Mars much quicker than we would have under the quote-unquote program of record. The program of record would have ended the space station in 2015. And if we had developed Ares, Ares would have had nowhere to go because the space station would have been defunct. The President has given us authorization to go and talk to our international partners and get their concurrence in extending the International Space Station to 2020. That at least gives us hope that we will have some place for our researchers to go for another 5 years to help us try as hard as we can to fill the gap on some of these capabilities that keep us from being able to go to Mars right now. If you gave me an infinite pot of money, I could not get a human to Mars within the next 10 years because there are just some things that we don't know. We don't understand the radiation environment. We don't understand fully what happens to the human body in transiting for 8 months. What I would like to do is develop an in-space technology that allows us to go to Mars in days instead of months. And I am told by very good friends of mine, people that Senator Nelson has had an opportunity to live with for a while, who think that we can go to Mars in days. At least half the time that it would take us right now, but we've got to invest in that technology. And we're oh so close, but we're just not there yet. So there are things that we have to do, and there are technologies that we have to develop if we want to be able to realize any of these dreams. And that, that's not a radical departure from anything. It's just a departure from the way that we were trying to get there. And the way we were trying to get there, I'm just not confident was gonna get us there anytime soon, if ever, in today's fiscal environment.
Well, let me say that I'm not sitting here defending the previous vision and the budget that was attached to it. It was inadequate. But I believe this new budget is a big step backward because of the fundamental problems I've tried to underscore.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
Senator Vitter, you and I had a private conversation over this issue of who developed the budget, and I shared with you my private concern, and since you've shared publicly your private concern, I'll just share mine. I don't think it's any different than the George Bush administration. I think OMB is running the space program because it designs the budget. And this is where I think that the president has to step out and take control and exert and offer the leadership on the goal that has now been articulated by the administrator of NASA, of which he had White House approval to say today, which is Mars. If you leave it to OMB, if we get there, it's going to be a long time coming. But if you have a presidential decision that that's what we're going to do, and then he turns to his Marine general and says, General Bolden, make it happen, then things can start popping. And that's where I think the genesis of this budget is.
Well, I certainly hope that we have a change in a new direction as you're working toward. So I certainly hope that. I guess I don't think it's primarily from OMB because this budget has some significant amount of new money. So if the goal is just to stay status quo in money or cut money, they could have done that a lot more dramatically. There is some significant new money here, but it's accompanied by a dramatic, radical, in my opinion, change of vision and approach, which I don't think suggests OMB simply counting beans. But that's my honest reaction. But I certainly hope we get the change and the new direction you're describing.
And that's in the context of they were making these decisions with the backdrop of the Augustine Commission. So since there is new money here, that gives us the opportunity to perfect this budget. Senator Lemieux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service to our country. I want to join my colleagues in my disappointment about this budget. And I can tell from listening to you that this is difficult for you, especially as it affects the NASA family. And as my colleague, Senator Nelson, knows better than anyone, what impact this is going to have on our home state of Florida. And I want to go back to something that the President of the United States said when he was seeking the office of the presidency. He was in Florida as candidate Obama, and he said that in the space program, America will need to lead the world to long-term exploration of the Moon and Mars. And even though you've, I think, done your best to try to give us some assurances that we eventually will go to Mars someday, as my colleagues have said, I have great concern about not having a goal and canceling these programs that ultimately seem like they would give us the steps along the path to get there. And what I'm concerned about is that without a goal and with sort of directionless spending, that next year the situation will be even worse. So a lot has already been said about the frustration of the members of this committee, and we certainly are going to look more at this budget, and we're going to look more at our priorities. It is not as if this administration doesn't know how to spend money. The last 2 years, these budgets have been, the deficit that they have created combined is worse than the deficit of the past 8 years combined. This year, for 2011, the administration is proposing a $3.8 trillion budget. We're going to have $2.2 trillion in revenues. So it's not a question of money, it's a question of priorities. And if we are going to still be the world's leader in space exploration and not abdicate that role to others who would certainly like to fulfill that mandate, we have to have a goal. As Senators Nelson and Senators Vitter said, we have to have a target, we have to have a plan. And I have great concern about saying we will get there someday and not knowing when that's going to be. But let me ask you some specific questions about the cancellation of the Constellation program. Whose idea was it to, or who made that recommendation to cancel Constellation?
Senator, the decision and the discussion that went on is pre-decisional, and I think, as you know, I am not at liberty to discuss pre-decisional information.
So was there a consensus then of all those on the committee that this was the right thing to do?
I'm not clear as to which
When you-
committee.
Well, in this decision-making process, was it unanimous that Constellation be canceled?
Senator, as I said before, I am one component of the discussion that goes into any presidential decision, and that information or that pre-decisional discussion that I have with the president, I'm not at liberty to share with anyone. I don't know what the input was from others that I may never have talked to.
When you talk about a plan of getting to the moon or Mars someday, what is your view of what the steps are going to be to get there?
Sir, the steps are pretty complex and complicated. We've got to, first of all, sit down and look at where we are in terms of the Constellation program and what was in it. We need to make sure that we don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We need to determine what technologies and what smaller projects are worthy of retaining, because that will tell us how much we actually have to expend in terms of brand-new technology or brand-new assets. So that's the first step. The next step is actually to sit down and say, okay, the way that we generally start is, if we're trying to get to Mars, I will use Mars since that is the ultimate destination, what do we need from what we have, what we know exists today, what do we need to enable us to get there as soon as possible?
Are we going to go to the moon first before we go to Mars?
My thought is that you will inevitably have to go to the moon, but you'll spend a lot of time on the International Space Station now that we're going to have it there until 2020, developing some of the technologies. Whether humans need to go on, I will tell you, I don't think humans need to go and live on the moon to do anything anymore. We have rovers that have come out of the Constellation program that enable us to put astronauts on the surface of the moon for a month at a time, completely self-sustained, and we don't have to build habitats. That in itself is a savings, and that came from the Constellation program. But this is one person's thinking, and I happen
you're
to
the
head
administrator,
18th.
so I'm looking
Yeah,
to you
but
for
sir,
some
I don't.
guidance.
I'm giving you at least a beginning of an idea, but there's a lot of work that has to be done by our team to determine what the steps are that eventually get us to Mars or get you to any destination. There are other things that we have to do, and that's the study of asteroids. And you may say, well, why? Well, it's because they can do really bad things to Earth. And if one of them happens to head this way and we don't understand it or don't have a way to deflect it or something else, that's part of my job is defense of the planet against things, not people, but things. All we needed to do was look at the Hubble image of Jupiter after it was impacted by an asteroid that left a scar that's several Earths in diameter. That's a very serious potential impact to Earth, or no pun intended, but a danger to all of us on the planet. So we need to study asteroids a little bit better. Some people say that that would be one of the earlier missions, one of the earlier human missions would be to put an astronaut on an asteroid. How we get there, I don't know yet, because these are things that when I was in the astronaut office and before coming back to NASA, people weren't talking about. So these are new challenges.
When do you think you might have a plan, Administrator, for where we're going, when we're going to get there, and what the steps along the way will be?
Senator, I can tell you that over the coming months, and not years, we'll develop a plan, and we will do that in conjunction with the Congress, with members of this committee and others to whom we're responsible, and we'll develop a plan over the coming months. But 2 weeks after the budget rollout, I'm not capable of giving you a complete plan on something as important as how we get deeper into the solar system.
Well, I think the concern that we all have is that plans and money go together.
Yes, sir.
So when we're talking about $6 billion or whatever sum it's going to be, the funding without a plan gives me concern.
Yes, sir.
And we need to, the funding needs to drive the plan and vice versa.
Senator, if I can use let me use Constellation as an example and tell you where I was when I came into this office. You know, Constellation at the time that I came into this office was a lunar-centric program. And it was because, I think, there was not sufficient funding for NASA to go off and plan a way to go to Mars, so we kind of drifted toward the moon again. Constellation, when I came into this office, while landers and those types of things were an important part of the program, they weren't funded, so there was nothing there. You know, there was thought about how we were going to do it, but it wasn't there because we didn't have the assets to do it. So we were planning to send humans back to the lunar surface, and when I came in, we were talking about habitats and the like. I'm not sure we need, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure you need habitats on the lunar surface. I do know that you don't have to send humans to Mars to make it habitable, or at least to begin to make it habitable for humans. We now have robots that can go do that. I would never send a human to do something in space that I had become confident a robot could go do. I served on the National Academy board to study saving Hubble back in 2004 when one of my predecessors canceled the last servicing mission to the Hubble Space Telescope. And one of the witnesses who's going to come in the next panel behind me can probably share the same story. When we began our meeting, we all determined that, you know, the risk was too great to send humans, and we wanted to send a robotic mission to service Hubble. We talked to every expert we could find in this country and in some other countries, and we were told, we'd love to help you, but the technology's just not there yet. And we finally convinced ourselves that the right thing to do was a human servicing mission, which we did incredibly well at the end of last year with STS-125. If we were to ask a panel today if they could do a robotic servicing mission to Hubble, they would tell you, yes, we can. I can take you to the Johnson Space Center today and introduce you to R2. That's a dexterous robot that, you know, can do things with its fingers that I can do with mine. That in our work with General Motors can now take a waterproof panel and put it on an automobile door and seal that panel in place using the same motions that we saw astronauts on 125 do, putting the thermal shields on the outside of the telescope. We couldn't do that in 2004 when that panel met and made the determination that it was worth risking humans. We're not there anymore. You know, technology develops out of need. As all of you have said, we do have to know where we're going. We want to go to Mars. We can't get there right now because we don't have the technology to do it. We're sort of in the same conundrum that I and my panel members were with Hubble.
Respectfully, though, when President Kennedy challenged us to go to the moon, we didn't have the technology in that year to go to the moon. When we decided that we needed to build an atomic bomb, we didn't have the technology when we made that decision, but we pushed forward because we had a goal. And if we don't have a goal to go there by a specific time, it seems to me that the drive, both funding and purposefully, will be lacking. So I think that's the concern that the folks have here on this committee and others. And let me ask you one more question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, about, you talked about getting to the space station. How are we going to get there?
So we're going to get there for the next 3 years on Soyuz, the same way we did after the Columbia accident. That was the only way we had to get to the space station following the unfortunate loss of Columbia and 7 crew members. We used Soyuz. We used our partners, the Russians. They have been reliable partners with us now for a number of years. We understand their system. We send astronauts there to train who are able to fly their system. When we are going to make commercial...
This is the Russian system,
This
right?
is the Russian system. And that we are stuck where we are because we don't have an alternative American-made system. It is my hope that by 2015, 2016, we will have successfully enabled American industry to produce launch vehicles that can provide us routine, reliable access to low Earth orbit.
What about extending the shuttle for that period?
Sir, that is something that I would not recommend to the President, and I could not honestly recommend to you. There is little value in trying to stretch the shuttle, you know, until we have the capability, a commercial capability, to get to low Earth orbit. Again, funding is something, you know, it cost us $2-point-some-odd billion a year to operate shuttle. I would like to get out of the responsibility, the cost of the operation and the infrastructure that it cost us with shuttle right now. There would be potentially recertification of the vehicle. It would be starting up production lines. There are a lot of things that make extension of the shuttle not a very good idea in my mind.
Well, you talked about these employees, these NASA family folks, these rocket scientists, literally, who are going to lose their jobs. And I have a great concern, as do my colleagues, about reassembling those folks once they disperse. And those 7,000 folks directly in Florida and maybe 14,000 others who are impacted, what are we going to say to them?
Senator, it is my hope. You know, I will never be able to save all the jobs. We knew that we were going to have a bathtub, if you will, where we were going to lose people when the shuttle program came to an end in 2010, decided a long time ago. And we were looking for ways to keep as many of them employed as we could. And that method at the time was going to be transitioning a portion of the workforce to the Constellation program. But we were never going to be able to retain the entire workforce. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to transfer some of them to the commercial sector. Senator Nelson mentioned, and I have talked to the people in the commercial sector, and I've told them I'm going to hold their feet to the fire. They have provided certain numbers for employment, that they say commercial space will bring a minimum of this, a maximum of that. I can't make that happen, and they must. And I will hold them responsible for that. So when they promise jobs, they ought to be there. You know, I would say a question that you could ask as a member of the Florida delegation is, okay, tell me how many people are working right now from the state of Florida. That's the question I asked. And when they told me none, I said that's unsatisfactory. And I got a note, you know, the next week that said, okay, we now have some Florida technical people working here, and we intend to convert it to 100% Florida by the time we're well into this program. I think those are the kinds of things that are important. You know, moving workers from one state to another does not help your state, and that's what I'm trying to do to help our workforce, is to make sure that someone speaks for them when we talk to the commercial entities. Now, again, I can't make them do anything. The President didn't empower me to order a commercial company to hire people from anywhere, but I can sure encourage them to do all that they can to take advantage of the workforce that I have, take advantage of the infrastructure that we have at the Kennedy Space Center and at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and that's what I'm dedicated to do over the coming years.
Well, General, I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing.
We're going to move to the second panel. Do you have any further comments? I just want to say, Senator Lemieux, one of the things that we pride ourselves on this panel, and I think it's applicable of the similar panel in the House of Representatives, is that we run this space is a nonpartisan issue, and we always do this committee in a bipartisan way. And as we analyze all of these things that are going on, as you can hear by the comments of the three of us, there have been sharp differences that we have with the administration's budget. But we've got to put it in the proper context also of the circumstance that this administration came into, in which NASA had been starved for the last half-dozen years of money, and it didn't have a rocket ready to go when the space shuttle was being shut down. So that there was this hiatus of a number of years that we were not going to have an American vehicle. So we've aired our differences and our grievances with what has been proposed by the President. And I want this committee to be very active, along with our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, as, to use a nice word, as we perfect this budget. Because there is a great deal at stake here. And it's not only for our employees in our respective states, but it clearly is for this nation being the leader in technology through its space exploration program. And we've got to make it sure that it's right. So with that, General Bolden, thank you very much for coming and being with us, and may I invite the second panel to please come up.
Senator, thank you and your colleagues very much for allowing us to come before you today, and I really do look forward to continuing to work with you all. We'll get it right.
Y'all got it. You know anybody that's got any coffee cooking back there? Good afternoon. Could you all shut the door there? Can you all shut the door? Thank you. Well, we have a distinguished panel. I assure you there won't be nearly as many fireworks as there was on the previous panel. But each of you brings to the table exceptional depth of experience, each in your own way. And let me introduce this distinguished panel. Captain Robert Gibson, United States Navy, retired, was known in the astronaut office as the best of the best. He's flown 5 times. He came by way of flying off of a carrier over Vietnam, went to Top Gun. He graduated first in the class in Top Gun. He was chosen for extraordinary missions and the first docking of an American spacecraft, the Space Shuttle, with the Russian space station Mir. And Captain Gibson, Hoot Gibson, was chosen to be the command of that flight. Miles O'Brien is a 30-year broadcast news veteran, and he was, by good fortune, because of his expertise, chosen to be the first journalist in space, and then by the misfortune of the Columbia disaster, never got to fly. And he has worked for years and years as a correspondent, anchor, producer. In one of the major flights, I think it was John Glenn's flight, Miles co-anchored with Mr. Space, Walter Cronkite, on that historic achievement of a 77-year-old, the original space hero of being able to go back into space at the age of 77. And maybe space does turn back time, because if you see John Glenn now, who is closing in on 88 years of age, he looks as good as many people in their 60s. And then we have Michael Snyder. And Mike has been in NASA for years and years. He started at the Kennedy Space Center. He's been in the Orbiter Element Division at the Johnson Space Center. He's been an engineer in all kinds of subsystems and orbiter propulsion and power systems. Mike has, in those propulsion and power systems, he has been one of the managers. And he is responsible for technical management of those systems. And we wanted somebody to testify today who has his on-the-line experience, which is so valuable for us to constantly remind ourselves that we hear not just from the guys at the top. We want to hear from the guys on the line as well. And then Tom Young brings the gray hair to the panel. And we need that, because here's one of the most accomplished people in America with regard to aerospace, defense, and space applications. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He is the former director of the Goddard Space Center. He is the former president and chief operating officer at Martin Marietta. And he has been a member of several other aerospace boards of directors. So we couldn't have a better panel. And I'm going to go by alphabetical order, so we will start with Captain Hoot Gibson.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to address this distinguished committee, and I'm going to say it's amazing how we have somewhat all focused on the same points. I was asked to talk about the administration's new proposal, and specifically a few items: the proposal to cancel the Constellation program, the reliance on commercial spacecraft for low Earth orbit, testing of Rocket X in support of a heavy lift vehicle, and astronaut safety issues. And I'm going to speak from the perspective of a longtime member of that NASA family, and indeed I feel somewhat that I still am, somewhat like a Marine, always a Marine. And notwithstanding the comments that we heard today, the administration's proposal opens more questions than it answers. What is the vision? Where are we going? And this abrupt change in NASA's exploration approach has no clear path, no destination, no milestones, no program focus, hence none of the technology pull that is so important to real innovation. With no specific program, it becomes too easy in the future to cancel something called technology development as simply unfocused and unaffordable. And this could take NASA down a path that would completely end its human spaceflight endeavor. NASA must maintain global leadership in human spaceflight. With the International Space Station in low Earth orbit now, NASA has established a frontier in space. To maintain the global leadership and core competencies in human spaceflight, NASA must now focus on establishing the new frontier beyond low Earth orbit. The Augustine panel had several things to say about that. This is a quote: "There is now a strong consensus in the United States that the next step in human spaceflight is to travel beyond low Earth orbit." Another quote: "The committee concluded that the ultimate goal of human exploration is to chart a path for human expansion into the solar system. Establishing this new frontier is inherently governmental due to the risks that must be accepted by our professional astronauts and the huge investments required. This means, in spite of the words that we've heard today, NASA needs a destination, a goal, whether it is Mars, Lagrange points, near-Earth asteroids, or whatever. NASA must define the roadmap and the technological achievements required to achieve this goal. This becomes the flexible path, gives us the technology pull, and focuses our investment. NASA needs a heavy lift vehicle to accomplish these goals. The specific questions, I want to start with astronaut safety. That was always a subject very dear to my heart, not just as an astronaut, but as a former member of the NASA family and a former chief astronaut. And of course, Senator Mikulski, as we know, has some very specific feelings in that area too. She said, astronaut safety, the safety of our astronauts is my #1 priority. This means whatever transportation system is chosen, it must protect our astronauts during launch, mission execution, re-entry, including long-duration spaceflight. As to the space shuttle part of this question, the Augustine Commission had several things to say there too. Space operations are among the most complex and unforgiving pursuits ever undertaken by humans. It really is rocket science. And new human-rated launch vehicles will likely be more reliable once they reach maturity, but in the meantime, the shuttle is in the enviable position of being through its infant mortality phase. Its flight experience and demonstrated reliability should not be discounted. And I think it's important to consider just briefly how successful we have been. And I want to say no one feels the loss of the Challenger and the Columbia more than I do, because I knew both of those crews. But it's significant to note that we have flown 130 missions now. We just completed the 130th mission of the Space Shuttle. And compare that to our previous entire space program, which was 31 total launches. All of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo amounted to 31 total launches. So therefore, we have flown more than 4 times as many launches with the shuttle as our entire space program prior to this. So it has been, I think, a great accomplishment. As for the commercial sector, they may very well ultimately achieve the success and the reliability that we demand for human endeavors, but to me it makes no sense to turn everything over at this time to an unproven vehicle. We need to allow them to establish a track record flying cargo that will allow us to evolve into human carriage with those types of vehicles. Now, at the same time, NASA needs to help the commercial service providers to be successful. And for that to happen, we need to leverage the core talents and the abilities, the operations, the safety of our NASA human spaceflight centers. And let's not lose the lessons that we've learned over 50 years of human spaceflight, some of them at fairly high cost. We must also maintain the core expertise in the people that we have at NASA that is so necessary to keep up any human spaceflight endeavor. With the ending of the Space Shuttle program and the proposed cancellation of the Constellation program, and with no specific program to replace them, more than a third of NASA's workforce of experienced space professionals is at risk of being lost. This would represent a major disruption in our human spaceflight program, as well as our economic and industrial base. We must make sure that we maintain that. And Senator Mikulski also touched on that when she said workforce transition, the retirement of the Space Shuttle should proceed as planned in 2011 after ISS assembly is complete, and any future direction must include a plan to maintain critical skills and incorporate lessons learned from our previous efforts to replace the shuttle and to soften any job dislocation impacts. That was her quote. Commercial spacecraft, as I've already touched on, may eventually be reliable enough to give us the capability that we need, but there's still a large learning curve that's ahead of them. And for them to succeed in space is going to take a lot of involvement with the NASA centers of expertise. There is a quote that the Augustine Committee had to say as well about that, and it is, if we craft the space architecture to provide opportunities to this industry, there is the potential, not without risk, that the cost to the government would be reduced. And it's this very risk inherent in this approach that demands that NASA remain vitally involved. We also need a backup to the Russian Soyuz for transporting our astronauts to the ISS. The present cost of $51 million per crew member will change when we no longer have our own access to space. The head of the Russian Space Agency, Anatoly Perminov, has already stated, and this is a quote, "We have an agreement until 2012 that Russia will be responsible for this," and this is referring to transporting astronauts of other nations to the International Space Station. And then he goes on to say, "But after that, excuse me, but the prices should be absolutely different then." And his statement, "absolutely different then," is somewhat frightening to me. The Russians are new to capitalism, but they know how it works, and when you have a monopoly, you charge monopoly prices. We have an opportunity at this time to leverage a lot of the research and the development and the funding that went into the Constellation program to continue with development of Rocket X, a vehicle that would support heavy lift vehicle, by continuing to develop the 5-segment rocket booster, the J-2 engine, and the Orion spacecraft as the quickest and most inexpensive way to working our way to a heavy lift vehicle. In summary, I want to state that with the retirement of the Space Shuttle later this year, and if the administration's proposal is followed, the United States will no longer be a spacefaring nation. We will have placed the future of our space program in the hands of the Russians and the unproven commercial sector, and with no program on the drawing boards, we will have ceased exploration beyond low Earth orbit and will be many years away from any hope of regaining what we once had. And what we once had was an exciting and vibrant space program that was the envy of the world and literally lit up the eyes of thousands of school children around the world that I've spoken to over the last 30 years. Mr. Chairman, I'm hopeful that you and your colleagues can alter the course that we appear to be on. Thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you, Captain Gibson. Miles O'Brien.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Vitter, thank you for allowing me to sit beside Hoot Gibson. He in the right seat beside me, that makes him my co-pilot. I often wondered what it was like for those poor Southwest captains when he would sit down in the right seat beside them and there was Hoot flying that 737. Here, it's yours, pal.
I'm here to support you.
Thank you. It's good to have a wingman. I'm a freelance journalist now, 18 years covering the space program, most of that with my former employer, a large cable news network, lowercase. I moved on. I'm now working on the web, as a lot of my compadres in journalism are right now, in partnership with spaceflightnow.com. We have a weekly program called This Week in Space, and this will be the lead story this week. I also need to tell you I serve as the chairman of the Education and Public Outreach Committee for the NASA Advisory Council, and to be clear today, my views here are my own, not anything to do with my NAC business. Mr. Chairman, Washington in general, we have a problem. There is an uproar across the land about NASA's budget, its course change, and it says a lot about how the public is no longer in the loop with the space agency. You know, the headlines read, NASA cancels its moon mission. I would submit to you that most people reading those stories didn't know we were going to the moon. And guess what? We really weren't the way it was funded. The program was packaged as the vision for space exploration. It never got its promised funding, as we've discussed here. And the vision, frankly, was focused a little bit on the rearview mirror. Constellation was touted as Apollo on steroids, but it really turned out to be a bit of a 90-pound weakling, didn't it? It was uninspired in its attempt to bring back the magic of the 60s. NASA, it seems to me, was acting a little bit like one of those middle-aged guys who was the high school football hero and won the state championships and spends all his time talking about the glory days. But the country has grown up and moved on. And I think it's time for NASA to get off the bar stool a little bit here and think about what's next. And that's what I see in this budget. I see a lot of optimism here. This is a grown-up approach to space exploration. It syncs the goals with national needs and the budgetary realities right now. I'd love it if we could do it all. It'd be great if we could go back to the moon. But does that lead us really anywhere farther out? The space agency is getting a bit of a slap in the face. They should be saying, thanks, I needed that, I suppose. But what we're hearing is not that. Now, change is never easy. But let's think about this for a minute. NASA is supposed to be all about change. In fact, if NASA cannot embrace change, actually invent change, we should close the place down. But there's more to this than that. because as much as anything else, we have here a failure to communicate. I give the administration plan high marks for its reassessment of priorities, but it did a horrible job telling the story. The headline should have been, "Space is now open for business," or "Space travel for the rest of us," or "Space station science gets a reprieve," or "NASA is working on green aviation and fixing air traffic delays," or "focusing on our favorite planet, Mother Earth." You get the idea. Instead, we got a bunch of the blue moon stories. Well, one of the reasons for this is it is my understanding this decision was closely held in the White House Office of Science and Technology, and it was rolled out essentially to NASA, to the key people at NASA, the weekend before the budget rolled out. I guess they were reluctant to tell the kids. So, but most people knew that Constellation was essentially a dead man walking. But denial is a powerful thing, and so NASA was caught a bit flat-footed with no strategic plan on how to explain the nuance of this story. And let's face it, the mainstream media doesn't have a clue either. Reporters who know some things about this beat have been unceremoniously dumped by the big papers and networks right and left, and many of them are, well, they're webcasting, I guess. So I guess you could say it's the perfect storm. The agency is really not sold on the change internally. The communication plan was non-existent, and the reporters are not well informed, and the public is disengaged. But the people like me who care a lot about this and have a passion for it are out there. And in advance of this testimony, I sought some opinions via Twitter and Facebook, my little circle of space cadets. And I'd like to have those comments submitted for the record, if you don't mind. There's a lot of passion out there, and a lot of people care deeply about what happens next. Like so many of the people I have heard from, many of whom have worked long and hard on Constellation, and I do hope we create sort of a space station freedom scenario here, where pieces of this can live on. I wish that NASA had not been painted into this corner. I wish we could have been thinking about and investing in the next great adventure for humans in space decades ago, so we wouldn't be facing this huge gap right now in human spaceflight capability. It could morph into abyss if we're not vigilant. That's the hand we've been dealt. Trying to recreate the past is not the path to go. Yesterday's technology is not the path. The public won't support it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Mike Snyder.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee today to discuss the challenges and opportunities of the proposed FY 2011 budget for NASA. My name is Mike Snyder, and it has been my honor and privilege to work on the Space Shuttle program for the past 13 years. I'm an engineer, and I'm just one of the tens of thousands of people across America who work daily on the nation's efforts in human spaceflight programs. The views you hear today are my own, but I can assure you that they are representative and shared by many in the aerospace workforce at large. The space program is often referred to as a national asset, an asset that has, does, and hopefully will continue to set the United States of America apart from all other nations. By extension, that same reference could and should be applied to the men and women that make it all happen. Today, unfortunately, I must inform you that morale across the entire human spaceflight workforce, both civil servant and contractor, is low. Perhaps the single biggest contributor to the low morale is the perceived lack of any detailed plans with clearly defined objectives and timetables for the future of spaceflight. Hanging on a wall in my office building is a poster that states, "If you aim at nothing, you are certain to hit it." And I cannot escape the potential relevance of that statement in this case. All too often, it seems, we are not allowed a policy that, while planning for the future and developing the technologies that will ultimately be necessary, that we take those first steps with our abilities and capabilities of today. We must break free of the cycle that any new program first requires the elimination of all that has come before it for the sake of that implementation. If NASA is to make such a dramatic change in course all at once, the question the workforce is left asking is, how can all the necessary details associated with this new direction be in place a short 7 months from now when 2 out of the 3 major human spaceflight programs are scheduled for termination? The answer, we believe, is that they will not. If that is indeed the case, then who will perform this work? Where will this work be located, and when will it be available? Many of us obviously have families who we obviously need to support. We cannot and will not be able to wait around and assume that better days are ahead. For the nation and this industry, the result will be a workforce with valuable and unique skills and experience that will be greatly diminished or lost completely, and one that cannot be rebuilt without significant time and effort. Contributing to the workforce dilemma is the apparent arbitrary 2010 retirement date of the shuttle. It would be far easier to stand down this unique capability if there were other vehicles ready to fill the void that shuttle retirement will surely create. We had hoped that we could pass the torch onto the follow-on program. Now, however, it simply looks like we're extinguishing it, regardless of the circumstances that that decision will create. As of today, no American replacement vehicles exist that are operational, and the nation is hinging the sustainment and full utilization of the International Space Station, our $100 billion investment, 26 years in the making, on the hope and assumption that they arrive. In my opinion, that is a strategic mistake of vast proportions, and one that requires the utmost reconsideration from all levels of the federal government. Instead, we have chosen to rely on a foreign nation as the sole method of transport for an unspecified amount of time to a space station which owes its very existence to U.S. leadership and has been so heavily funded by the American people. In general, this has been interpreted as a lack of faith from our government in our ability to fly the most capable vehicle to ever orbit and return to the Earth in support of the ISS. The reality of the situation is that we need a better and smoother transition that recognizes the new robustness of the Space Shuttle performance, and one that does not instantly and all at once swing the pendulum to the opposite extreme. We need a transition that not only plans for the future with a detailed program, including timetables for beyond Earth orbit exploration, but also supports our immediate and critical mission, full utilization of the ISS. We need a transition that takes advantage of the capabilities of multiple commercial providers in combination with any potential NASA follow-on vehicle to ensure that use of ISS. At present, this use can only be accomplished with the extension of the Space Shuttle program. Once these commercial providers or other capabilities have met the appropriate performance milestones that prove their capability, then that is and should be the trigger for shuttle retirement. If this nation allows ISS to degrade and not realize its full potential, then potentially so does the business case for these commercial providers. Extension of the shuttle program also opens up the possibility of a shuttle-derived heavy lift vehicle. A recombination of shuttle elements into a new inline configuration could yield that capability in just a few years and take advantage of the natural synergies between shuttle, the potential HLV, their shared infrastructures, and the current experience base of the workforce. Finally, we have heard a lot about education and inspiring the next generation. It's an obviously worthy goal. My fear is that kids who would otherwise do well in this field will ultimately be discouraged from entering it by multi-generational programs where we promise to go somewhere and then always retreat. If we as a nation are serious about spaceflight, then that is something that we must absolutely change. I never saw a man walk on the moon, and that was something already relegated to history books by the time that I was born. My real concern with the current proposal is that my girls will grow up in a country where they too have to look to the history books to see what this nation used to be capable of achieving. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to respond to any questions you or other members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Mike Snyder. Mr. Tom Young.
Chairman Nelson and Mr. Ventnor, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to comment on the proposed fiscal year 2011 NASA budget. As requested, I will concentrate on NASA's budget proposal beyond human spaceflight. However, I can't resist offering a few comments on human spaceflight at the conclusion of my remarks. It's important to define the basis and criteria for my assessment. I believe what NASA does says much about our country. What NASA does is very much a part of what we believe to be important, our role in the world, and our values. I have no doubt NASA's accomplishments in the past 5 decades, to use an Olympic analogy, have placed the United States at the center position on the podium. We must assure that our current decisions result in a continuation of this success. The operational elements of the NASA budget are science, aeronautics and space research and technology, and human spaceflight, including both exploration and space operations. There is significant growth in the new science budget as compared to fiscal year 2010 budget. This growth is in earth science. Planetary science and astrophysics are largely unchanged, and some decline exists in heliophysics. The National Academies produce decadal surveys that provide scientific basis and proposed priorities for each discipline of science. I have the privilege of serving as Vice Chairman of the Space Studies Board, which along with other boards provides oversight of the decadal surveys. I'm also a member of the committees currently conducting astrophysics and planetary surveys. The decadal survey process is enormously comprehensive, representing the best in scientific debate and decision-making. The result is a 10-year plan with extraordinary support and credibility. The Earth Science Decadal has been available for a few years and provides a sound basis for the growth proposed in the fiscal year 2011 budget. Astrophysics and planetary surveys are currently in development. While the proposed budget will support impressive astrophysics and planetary missions, there are extraordinary mission opportunities responsible to the most profound questions concerning our solar system and the universe that will not be affordable. I believe the same observations are true for heliophysics, which is just beginning the next decadal survey process. In summary, much can be accomplished within the proposed science budget that will contribute to our understanding of Earth, our solar system, and the universe. Although it is frustrating knowing that there are worthy opportunities that cannot be accomplished within the proposed budget, there is some consolation in knowing we're implementing the best of the best. The growth in aeronautics and the new space technology line are most positive. It is difficult doing the things NASA does without a strong technology base. The proposed space technology line will strengthen this critical area. The growth in aeronautics and the new space technology program should be strongly supported. There's also considerable technology funding included in the exploration budget. While significant benefits can be realized from the total proposed technology investments, we must recognize the lack of focus and identified mission uses can result in wasteful and non-productive hobby shop activity. Much is yet to be done to structure a technology program that is properly focused. It is easy to spend technology money. It's hard to spend it productively. And a critical aspect of spending it productively is to have it as a part of an integrated strategy. That brings me to my overarching comments on human spaceflight. The Augustine Commission report had a subtitle that I believe deserves our attention: A Human Spaceflight Program Worthy of a Great Nation. I believe the human spaceflight program contained in the proposed fiscal year 11 budget fails this test. My reasons for reaching this conclusion are: 1, I believe the reliance upon commercial human spaceflight for access to low Earth orbit is a risk too high and is therefore not a responsible course. I do hope the commercial endeavors are successful. 2, the absence of a clearly defined human exploration program with no expectation of any human exploration for decades is not consistent with my views of a great nation. We can only hope that by this time next year, we will recognize that our current course is not tenable, address those areas that need the most attention, and reestablish a human spaceflight program once again deserving of a great nation. Thank you.
You are an excellent panel. Thank you. You have contributed mightily. I might point out that this committee will hold a hearing on commercial spaceflight, and we will dig into the details with appropriate witnesses over the course of the next few weeks. Let me ask just a few questions, and we'll round out this hearing today. For Hoot Gibson, how do you think NASA will certify crew safety on commercial vehicles?
I'm not sure what their approach stands right at this moment, but the way that they need to do it needs to be the way that we have always done it with our inherent NASA-developed crew vehicles, and namely by following the human rating standard that NASA has in place for these vehicles. I don't think that we could arrive at the right place if we just say we're going to build it for cargo with some relaxed requirements, launch it a couple of times and see what our success rate is, and then declare it safe for human spaceflight. I think there's going to have to be a rigorous process that we go through in the same manner that we do on the vehicles that we develop ourselves.
So the agency is going to have to define a process to validate the commercial providers for human requirements.
Yes, and many of these, Mr. Chairman, are very specific items, the design of the electrical systems, the design of the structure, the structural margins, all of these things are very much spelled out in the human rating standards, and we're going to have to make sure that every step of that process is followed by the commercial providers as well.
I'm going to ask a question that I know your answer is yes, but I want to get it on the record. Should the astronaut office be involved with this certification and validation process?
Absolutely, yes, Mr. Chairman.
You are a propulsion expert. Is heavy lift a priority?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. With all of the comments that we've heard from the Augustine Commission and all of the direction that we have seen in the country in many years now, for many years now, we need to branch out beyond low Earth orbit, and that's going to require heavy lift for us to do that. And the obvious path, in my opinion, for us to follow at this point is to leverage the $9 billion of investment that we have already made in the previous program and take the things that we have developed, which are in direct support, as I mentioned earlier, of the heavy lift vehicle. If we take the cancellation costs that are involved in that program and add it to the amount we've already spent, we wind up with a fairly significant price with nothing to show for it. If we continue the testing up through the Envision testing at this time, we can accomplish that at no additional cost over what the price would have been, and we wind up with something instead of winding up with nothing.
So the $2.5 billion in the president's budget to cancel the program, instead use that to continue testing on Rocket X and to continue to develop a capsule that ultimately would go on the heavy lift.
Yes, sir, exactly. Exactly the direction that my opinion is that we should be proceeding in. And that way, as I say, we wind up with something at the end of this whole entire process instead of cancellation costs and winding up with nothing.
Mr. O'Brien, you have pretty well commented on the mood of the country, and we've heard it from other witnesses as well. And yet you noticed things that have to change and that NASA has to change. How can you, I'm asking you an impossible question, but it's one that we have to ultimately answer. How do we get from the doom and gloom of the perceived program through this paradigm shift to make and remake a new NASA?
It's really important we bring people along for the ride, one way or another. And I thought it was really, I was struck and impressed that there is talk in this budget about participatory exploration. You know, if you think about it, NASA has really pioneered this whole notion of bringing people along for the ride. You know, it really started way back in the Mars Pathfinder days, when scientists would be seeing images on Mars at the same time people at home were watching them on the internet. The more we bring people along for the ride, the more they're going to be a part of this whole process. And that's why I think, you know, if we can figure out how to thread the engineering needles that Hoot has laid out here, and that's very important that this is a safe way to fly. I don't think anybody in the commercial sector would tell you they want to do it in an unsafe manner. If we can figure out how to do that, it portends tremendous opportunities for a lot of people to go to space. We've had 500 people go to space since it all began. Two of you are in the room here, and wish I had had my opportunity as well. We should be sending 500 people a month, and for NASA to figure a way to get out of the way in low Earth orbit and allow this industry to thrive, I think will enthuse the public in ways we can't imagine. I remember being out there to cover that X Prize back in 2004, October of 2004. It was positively electric in the atmosphere out there, because even though it was a suborbital hop, something we did in 1961 with Alan Shepard, it was just a rank civilian doing it. You don't need the right stuff. And I think if NASA can make that happen, make it possible for more people to go and bring people along for the ride in other ways, I think they'll recapture that connection to the public.
Deep down, I believe that the public has a yearning for space travel by humans because it is our nature as a people. We are explorers. We are adventurers. We've always had a frontier. Along the way, space travel has become ho-hum to the public. Why the disconnect?
Well, I think because people couldn't go, or they had the feeling they couldn't be a part of it in any meaningful way without being #1 at Top Gun school. You know, I guess when you look at the previous frontiers, anybody could get in a covered wagon and head west, right? This is a different kind of frontier. And for a long time, rightly so, it was the bastion of a very elite, exclusive club of people who got to go. Well, that's got to change. We're at the point now where we can change that. And NASA can help enable that change if it decides to do so, and this budget is all about that. So, you know, I think there's a lot of pitfalls here, and we're talking about a lot of unproven things, and we've been talking about a robust commercial sector for as long as I've been covering space. But this is the first time I've seen NASA in a meaningful way put some bets down in this area and place some investments in a way that may open up this frontier to more people.
So you don't think that these bets are necessarily bad, that the commercial boys will be able to produce?
Well, I'm not an engineer. I'm a history major. I just play a scientist on TV, or actually on the web now. But no, I can't assess the engineering aspects of it. My sense of being a student of all of this is that we're very close to making this possibility. And it's not something that this industry can do entirely on its own. There's not a business model that stands on its own yet. But if you go back to the origins of NASA, the NACA, what did it do? It fostered technology, and it shoved it out into the commercial sector. I think it's time for NASA to get back to that NACA mentality here a little bit, at least as far as it goes in low Earth orbit. I'm not talking about commercial trips to Mars. I think that's where NASA should be, and that's where the technology push should be, and that's where this budget recognizes that fact. Enabling the technology to go way beyond low Earth orbit is what NASA should be doing. Getting out of the way in low Earth orbit and helping these commercial players make it possible for lots of other people to go there is exactly what should be happening right now to keep NASA engaged and vital.
You've got as good a sense of the American public's feelings. If the president said, we're going to go to Mars, and he laid out a vision, what do you think the American public how they would respond?
Well, I can imagine it would be an interesting discussion in this time we live in with the budgetary constraints that we're all dealing with and with the economy the way it is. But John F. Kennedy made his similar announcement, the economy wasn't so great by my read of history. So I think a broad vision, if it's supported in the context of enabling technologies, inspiring kids, and maintaining our competitiveness, keeping us technologically the leaders of the world, in all that context, I do think it would be supported, but it has to be laid out in those terms.
Mr. Snyder, of course, we talked about how Constellation has been canceled in this program. And we've talked a bit about the NASA budget is increased by a fairly substantial amount. In the first year, however, it's de minimis. It's $6 billion over 5 years, but it's about 1.5% in the first year. But there is the renewed commitment to technology development. Can you give us your views about how these changes affect the overall number of jobs supported by NASA and the workforce distribution across different NASA centers?
I think that's the real question, Senator. What we are thinking is we all know how long it takes to change contracts, to change directions, to get all the people that you need to do that work in place. And given the fact that we are 7 months away from the end of those programs, many of us are going to have no choice but to disperse, to go off into other industries, to go potentially to other states, to other locations, to do what we need to do to support our families. Now, ultimately, eventually, those contracts will be in place. Will people necessarily be able to or want to jump ship back to NASA? I don't think so, because there's going to be a feeling of being burned, of it being unstable, and all those factors that will go into it. And so you are looking at a net loss, significant net loss of experience that I do not think is going to be easily reestablished.
As I have shared privately with various people in the government, including NASA, about trying to take care of the workforce with additional work, such as emphasis in this budget on research and development, it is my hope that you could see in part of this workforce transition that there is a specific plan put in place by NASA for that transition, so that those areas that are hard hit by the retirement of the shuttle and the cancellation of Constellation would have a softer landing. If I sense correctly that the Congress is at least going to make a stab at, don't call it Constellation, call it the continuation, as Captain Gibson has, of testing, of test rockets that would lead us in the R&D process of developing a heavy lift vehicle and the capsule to go do what NASA can do best, which is explore the heavens. Then that, of course, will be some amelioration of the jobs and would give some part of your workforce that you're referring to some hope. You want to comment on that?
I think it would. But even if we continued what has been referred to as the program of record, I think we are still looking at a significant strategic mistake in shutting down the space shuttle before we need to. The space station is up there now. We are relying on the Russians for, some unspecified amount of time. You heard General Bolden here today say that he wants redundant access. As soon as we stand down that fleet, that redundant access is gone. And it's a foreign monopoly now at this point. The shuttle is the most capable vehicle that we have ever had. I challenge anybody who will stand up and say that it is unsafe or use other more colorful analogies to describe it. Clearly, they don't know exactly what we do day in, day out to make sure that that fleet, every mission, is as safe as it possibly can be. I think commercial space is ultimately going to be capable of it. But for the sake of the space station, all that money that we have spent on getting it up there, that we can't just walk away from it until we know that we're going to be able to support it. If you look at what happened to the space station during the Columbia return to flight phase, we went from 3 crew to 2 crew. We did manually maintenance. We did just what we had to do to keep the station operational. Today, that station has 5 or 6 people on board. It's got many more labs and much more complex. And yes, we have our ATVs and the HTVs from our international partners, but those were always meant to be in support of the orbiter. So I cannot logically see how, if we take the orbiter out of the loop, the main cog out of the loop, that we just think that everything's going to be fine. Ultimately, like I said, those commercial people the providers could probably get there, but until that time, I don't see that it makes sense to retire shuttle. With the HLVs, the potential HLV, clearly if you keep shuttle going, there is some synergies there that could certainly help ultimately drive down your cost of your HLV, as well as potentially the cost of your shuttle program, because you could draw off of those and off of that workforce.
Mr. Young, you've been vice chairman of the Space Studies Board. Can you explain how NASA has used the results of the decadal surveys to determine their priorities?
It's actually quite I think quite an impressive process watching it work. If I give just a tad of background, it's probably a year and a half of effort by a large number of people in the scientific community that go into producing a decadal survey. So it's well thought out, well debated, and highly credible when it's finished. I think NASA, and I will also say the Congress and the OMB, I believe have significant, based on experience, have significant confidence in the decadal surveys. And NASA today, Administrator Bolden, I've heard say it, clearly, Ed Weiler, who runs the space program, has a lot of experience, commented. They look at it as the basis for the science program that NASA and the country does today. So we really have a very comprehensive process that I think we should be very proud of. And the net result is that we really do things that are the absolute best of the options that are out there, which is the reason that we make considerable progress on understanding both the Earth, our solar system, and the universe.
You have been chairman of the independent review team that looked at the INPOSE program. This is a program between several agencies. Now, the administration's new plan would greatly increase NASA's role. What's your reading of the administration's recent restructuring of the INPOSE program?
It's extraordinarily better than status quo. And though we probably went further in our recommendations, I think it's time to get on with the program, and I would strongly recommend support for the restructured program.
Well, we have had a good hearing. This is the first step on a journey of many, many steps. And we will keep the record open for 2 weeks for senators to submit questions for the record. Thank you all for your participation. It has been excellent, and the meeting is adjourned.